So for the project, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I'll be very grateful if you could answer them the best you can.
Okay.
Okay. So when did you realize you were a part of the LGBT community, meaning you started to like women?
I think that I first realized there was something. I'm a farm girl from Illinois, downstate Illinois, and I think I realized sometime during my childhood, certainly during high school, that there was something different about me from everyone else, but I didn't know what that something was. It was not as if you went and looked anything up in the library. And I mean, didn't even know the word gay at that time. And there was no literature, there was nothing, so I had no idea. And so after high school, I migrated to Chicago and have lived here for the better part of the last 40 years. I've lived out of the city for 5 or 6 years, but mostly I've been in Chicago. And I got here in like 1963 or 64.
Does your family know that you are gay?
Yes. During my brother, I have 2 siblings, a brother and a sister. They are 9 and 10 years older than me, and I've been out to them for a number of years, and their spouses, and their children, and their children's children, and I don't come out to each generation. I let them deal with that. I never was out to my parents. I had a couple of occasions where I tried on one occasion to bring the issue up to my dad and another occasion to my mother. And on both occasions, I changed the subject. So I let it go at that. And they were never anything other than completely inclusive and generous to anyone I brought home. I lived with another woman for 15 years, and she was treated as a part of our family. Even though I never came out to my parents.
Do you have your own family, like a wife?
No, I do not. No, I do not. I'm 72. I live at Town Hall Apartments. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is. Are you familiar with the Center on Halsted?
Yes, that's where I was contacted to call you.
Okay, there's and the center is just celebrating its 10th anniversary, and it's a social service and gay community organization kind of combined. And and I don't always use the term LGBT. I try to be politically correct, but as someone in her late 60s, early 70s, we have trouble remembering all those letters. So at any rate, we had, or the center at least, started working almost immediately on the idea of trying to have a senior building that would be rent controlled or rent subsidized. And so 3 years ago this fall, that building opened down at the opposite corner from the center in Halsted, which is at Halsted and Waveland in Boys Town, and then at Halsted in Addison in the old police station, Town Hall Police Station, is now an 80-unit building, and it is we pay a third of our income. And in terms of rent, and Chicago Housing Authority and therefore HUD pay the other 2/3 basically, or 70% basically. And so this is one of a half dozen or so units like this in the country that are gay friendly. It is about 70% gay and 30% straight, more or less. So I'm fortunate to get in here. There were 500 applicants. There's a waiting list of some 350 people who would like to be here. And as I said, there are only 5 or 6 units like it in the country, although there's another one being worked on at Logan Square. I don't know if that has been finalized or whether they're still working on funding for that. One thing about the town hall apartments I said it was in the old police station, and they saved the facade from that building and first floor areas, which have become the senior center for the center in Halstead, a block away. And then from the second floor on up is the 80 apartments of one bedroom and studios, and the old town hall here in Boys Town, if you will, which is what the neighborhood is called, it's part of Wrigleyville, was famous back in the day, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s for the major police station from which raids were carried out on gay bars. And I don't know if your research has taken you to any of that. And where people were, particularly transvestites, were taken then to the police station and beaten, and this is the station in which that happens, which makes it kind of ironic that now it is a gay friendly apartment building for as opposed to the police station where those kinds of things went on in the past.
Speaking of gay bars, have you ever heard of the Stonewall Inn in New York City?
Yes.
And are you aware of the Stonewall riots that occurred during
Correct.
the 19...
You know, that was, I don't know how much where your research has taken you. That was not big news when it happened. Mm-hmm. It in my reading in the last several years, it actually was like it was 2 days long, 2 nights long, and it made like the 6th or 7th page of the New York Times only, the second day in. It was not a big event in New York, let alone across the rest of the country. And word slowly spread about that event. And then what started making it particularly important was that across the country, the following year and ensuing years, there were rallies held the last weekend in June to mark that event. But it was not really big news, even in the gay community when it actually happened. It's something we became more aware of in the ensuing years, in the early to mid-70s.
Do you think that the Stonewall riots affected the LGBTQ movements today, meaning they influenced them?
Yes, I think there have been several influences. There's, however, that's the one that we earmark and general media earmark as the stepping off point. But there were gay rights organizations as early back as the Medicine Society in Los Angeles. It was formed in 1950, and something called the Society for Human Rights here in Chicago in 1924. But in terms of an event, certainly Stonewall marks that. And it took place in 1969, and I think it's important to know that all sorts of other civil unrest stuff was going on then, too. The 1968 Democratic Convention here in Chicago and the riots of that. The deaths of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, the assassination of both of them, and putting a man on the moon in 1969. And so all of this gave birth to the fight in the early 1970s to get a ratification for the Equal Rights Amendment, which didn't happen, of course. And that was like in 1971, 72. And so there was all sorts of stuff going on. There were all these organizations starting up. And, I came, some of you were there and gone before you even knew it. The modern movement here in Chicago probably comes out of the University of Chicago, I think. I don't know where your research has taken you. Are you familiar with a book called Out and Proud in Chicago?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, I want to tell you that is a book of mostly, not entirely, but a lot of news articles from state publications, but particularly gay publications. It is edited by Tracy Bain, Baim, and she is the co-founder and publisher of the Windy City Times, which is free gay newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been involved in as a reporter in the gay community since the 1981 or something, I think she says in here. If you can get hold of this or a copy of this, or if you can get hold of her, and she's often generous with her time. Mm-hmm. You could use my name if you want to say that I recommended you get in touch with her. She is a wealth of information, and this book, and I don't know exactly. I know you can get it by contacting her. So what you'd want to do is go on the web and find the Windy City Times, mm-hmm. and email Tracy Bain, Baim, in care of the newspaper. And find out about how to go about getting that or getting information from that. That's just a wealth of information about stuff through the late 60s and early 70s, and people who were very much involved here on the scene then. And so we had all these various organizations, all of which were at odds. We had men's organizations, we had lesbian organizations, we had organizations that were more conservative, we had organizations that were more leftist. The Madison Society, I don't know if you're aware of this, when it started in 1950 in Los Angeles, actually, was started by three guys who were members of the American Communist Party, three young men. And so the gay movement has its roots actually in the leftist political movements, and which often have been used. That's often been used to try and bury us, actually. And of course there were lesbian lesbian organizations. There were conservative. There were separatist lesbian movements, mm-hmm. and this is all going on through the early mid-70s. There's just a whole ton of different names of organizations, some of them lasting several years, some of them lasting several weeks or several months at a time. And then I think we come to, so we're all out there sort of flapping around separately with these various organizations, and not a whole lot is happening. And then in the mid-'80s comes the AIDS crisis. And I think most people who are involved in all, or who have spent any time looking for the history of the gay rights movement, particularly in Chicago, but all over the whole country, not just Chicago, mark the AIDS epidemic as the starting out point of the new human rights campaigns, gay rights campaigns, where we found out that, in fact, we could work together, the men, the women, the bi, the transgender. There were two basic groups then, a conservative group wanting to work through courts, and an activist group wanting to take to the streets, trying to get monies, research, care, laws changed, all kinds of things. You could be fired from your job, all kinds of stuff could happen then. And so we found out then that we could work together on common goals. And so once, through the worst of the AIDS crisis, various groups started coming together and working on different kinds of things in terms of gay rights. And there was sort of an agenda for that sort of thing, meaning job security, that you couldn't get fired, housing, equal housing. It never even occurred to us that in our lifetimes there was going to be something called gay marriage. Mm-hmm. It was not even on the agenda. So in that regard, there has been just enormous strides made. It all starts out, I think, or the modern day movement certainly does, with a riot or series of riots in New York, which no one paid a whole lot of attention to until it spread basically by word of mouth over a period of 1 or 2 years. And then people in other cities decided that they needed to start marking this event. And there were parades held. There was one in 1970 here in Chicago, started at Bughouse Square and went downtown someplace, I can't remember, on the anniversary of Stonewall the year before. There was one in Philadelphia. There may have been one in San Francisco. I don't know about L.A. And so but those were really things that had spread by word of mouth, not because there was no real big gay press to spread this, and it certainly was not in the straight media, which is why there's an interesting article in this book I just referenced for you, about how the straight media didn't have anything in it about gay people, about gay lifestyle, about gay anything. It references an article, I think, in 1963 in the New York Times, and did an article about a gay nightlife, a men's bar nightlife. And then in June of 1966, the Chicago Daily News, which is a now defunct Chicago newspaper, did a series of 3 or 4 articles. Prior to that, there was nothing in newspapers, nothing in magazines, nothing. So you just didn't know anything about it. And the modern movement all comes out of Stonewall, but in a greater sense, it comes out of that whole time in our history when we were having demonstrations against Vietnam, the Democratic National Convention, as I said, the assassination of public figures, and that whole thing put together kind of is where the birth of the modern day gay rights movement is, I think. Am I answering your questions, or am I just babbling on?
You are answering my questions. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Do you yourself participate in the protests or the campaigns?
Yes and no. I have not. I did not so much during my formative years. I was involved in working for the Equal Rights Amendment, and I belonged to the National Organization for Women at that time when we were trying to get the ERA ratified. I dropped out of that organization in the mid-'70s then after we were not successful in getting it ratified, and have recently, after 40 years, rejoined it. I spent my time, frankly, living in the fast lane and partying. I was in bars, boozing and smoking cigarettes and having a good old time through most of that period. I was aware of some of it. I got involved in some of it. I attended a few lesbian separatist meetings and soon stopped doing that because, well, it didn't make any sense. How was that gonna work in the long run? How is that going to work in the long run? Well, no, there was no answer for that. And they really meant it. They really meant that you were supposed to function only by doing business and having relationships with women, and that you were supposed to reject all of your male relationships, including your siblings, for instance. None of which ever made a lot of sense to me. And so I didn't last very long in that group. But in recent years, I have come to activism a little bit, I guess, in my retirement. I had throat cancer 20 years ago, and I survived that. I had stage 3-4 when there's only 4 stages, and was left with a boatload of different kinds of after effects. And of course, then you run out of insurance. And so I have a story much like many people of my generation, who soon you've got all these medications you have to take, and so soon you start using the credit cards, and pretty soon you have you have a financial crisis on your hands, or in fact you go broke. I say this not because it is unique to me. There are all kinds of people of my generation who have this issue. They are both gay and straight. And there are people who have maybe juvenile diabetes, maybe Parkinson's disease, maybe there are now men who are 30-year survivors of AIDS. Mm-hmm. And they used up their money a long time ago. And until they turn 65 and get into the Medicare system, there has been nothing in between there in terms of financial help. And so that's how you sort of become eligible to live in the building I live in. And my story is far from being unique. So recently, in the past 4 or 5 years, and I said that the center in Halstead is both a social service agency and a community center. And so they have art shows, they have dances now and then, they have lectures, they have a cyber center with 15 or 20 computers that is open to the public, and they have a youth program, a senior program. They have a full-size gymnasium where the community uses it for volleyball leagues and basketball leagues. And so they have all of this, and then they have these different kinds of programs. There's just a senior program, a youth program, all of these kinds of outreach things. They have a behavioral health program, and I have, and they're also in the senior program through the city of Chicago. They have a hot lunch program, and so I have utilized almost every program that they have. I say that the center saved my life, or helped save it. I found it at a time when I was in great need, and I don't know what would have happened to me if I had not found it. And I utilized all these services without it costing me anything. So what I have done is I have started out by doing things like talking to someone like you. And I belong to a group called Senior Voice, and we meet once a week for an hour. And in that hour, we solve all things having to do with gay seniors. In an hour, we whip it out. And we act as a loosely defined speakers bureau, if you will, and we go out into the community, and we talk to we respond to requests from the community. We aren't out in the street processing. We respond to people like you. We respond to people like mass undergraduate and master's behavioral health programs from the various universities. We speak to nursing professionals and to physicians in various medical school programs and in their internships. We speak to high school groups and college groups in general as they request us to come and do. And 3 or 4 of us will go together usually as sort of a little panel, and we have discovered that the best thing that we can do, if you talk about being LGBT and aging, is for us to each tell our personal stories. And that's sort of what we do, and it's been extremely well received. And then as a result of that, the center in Hallstead has asked me to be involved some with delivering some of my experiences to groups to whom they're trying to do fundraising. And individuals using more, occasionally a corporate sponsor, but mostly individual persons that they're looking to for contributions. And so I have done some of that. So I guess if you say that I have come to my activism, yes, but I have come late. I have participated. I guess the first thing I participated, there was a gay march on Washington in 1993. And I went to that. There were 1 million of us there. And that was the first time that, I don't know if you're familiar with something called the quilt.
The what?
The quilt. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. The quilt is, and you'd have to Google this to see how many it is, but
okay.
They are made of all different kinds of materials, mostly cloth, and then with things drawn or depicted upon them. They are like about the size of a 3x5 flag, each one. And there is what is called the original quilt. And these are all done by family members and loved ones of persons who died of AIDS. And the first time this was displayed was on the Mall in Washington, D.C. in 1993 at the March. So that was one of the things that went on that weekend. And then a rally on Sunday, a march and rally. So that was really the first time I had involved myself in any real activism or demonstrating. I try to do that as I can now, and I have been doing a fair amount of it, and now I've been having some issues with my health, mainly with some issues with lung disease, and so I have my 30 years of smoking early in my life is coming back to catch up with me, even though I quit smoking 20 years ago. And so it's beginning to be somewhat difficult for me to go and do places where I, in fact, have to march or have to go a long ways to get to it. But I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing my emails. I'm emailing everybody I can think of, and I'm participating in phone banks and things like that. So those are the kinds of things that I can continue to do.
Do you think that the more people that protest or are in the movement make a difference for the LGBTQ community to get more rights?
Absolutely. When gay marriage passed, too many, I think probably everyone in the straight community and far too many of us in the gay community thought that our work was all done. And so one of the things that we were interested in my senior groups and became aware of, and we talked to some of the gay rights groups in the state of Illinois, and in particular concern was the fact that there were senior people who are gay, who have been gay, had been out for years, who as they entered nursing home environments, were going back into the closet for fear of being hassled by other residents and staff, and which, if you start to think about it, is pretty sad. And so that was something that was the idea to try and get some legislation, this is on a state level, passed in the state of Illinois, which would require that nursing homes and those kinds of long-term facilities have cultural training, not just about gay people, but cultural training, period, across the board. And the answer that they got from the legislature was, well, we went out and stuck our necks out on the gay marriage thing. Now leave us alone for a while. That was the response. And I think we have come to know, if we hadn't known before the election, we are finding out very, very quickly that we had best be paying attention. And we need to be very vigilant. And not only for advancing the cause of gay rights or human rights, if you will, but also to make sure we don't lose ground of what we already have, which I think we are under threat. Not just the gay community, of course, but there's a threat in general, and I think we need to be paying attention and taking it seriously. And I think most people are paying attention to that in the gay community and are aware. And I think it is helping to keep us united. Because once again, after gay marriage passed, we sort of fragmented off into our individual little groups again, and there wasn't a whole lot of communication going on, I don't think. And so now, faced with these issues, I think there's starting to be again communication between various LGBT groups and going forward.